Now that we have discussed the types of data, let's see what we mean by data collection methods. We have already stated that when doing research, what is expected from the researchers is to create new knowledge, and this new knowledge has to be based on some evidence. Evidence is usually the information that is extracted from the data through logical reasoning. And the data needed for extracting the information are usually collected in some way. On the right side of this slide, you can see the so-called knowledge pyramid, where you can see that the data are the basis for extracting information. So starting with maybe large amount of data, we extract the information that we use to create knowledge. And that's why the knowledge is at the top of this pyramid. We have talked about primary data and secondary data, and you saw that primary data are those collected for the first time for the purpose of the research, and they are usually some original data, while the secondary data are data that already exists, whether they are facts from literature or they have been collected for another purpose. All of this can be secondary data. When doing your work on a PhD thesis or willing to publish an original research paper, you're usually required to collect primary data. That is why this section will be primarily about collecting primary data, and the methods that you will look at are those used for collecting primary data. Let's see now what is a data collection method and what questions we need to answer before indulging into data collection. Data collection method is the manner in which data are collected. And before we start selecting the method, we need to answer the following questions. What will be the data to be collected? For answering this question, we need to have a very well structured aim and objectives, as well as very well formulated research question. Only then we will be able to envision what are the data that we need. How to collect the data? This question actually is answered when a data collection method is selected, and you will see several data collection method will be discussed, and based on their advantages, disadvantages, and what data you need, you will select the appropriate method. Who will collect the data? It will depend on the resources in the research project, so it can be the researcher himself or herself, or anybody else that's involved into the research project. The answer to the question when to collect the data once again depends on the research question. It depends on how we will collect the data and who will collect the data. So this question can be answered once we know the answer to the previous three questions. When we collect the data, when we do the actual collection, we need to be ethical and not to do harm to any of our respondents or co-workers. We need to pre-test the data collection. No matter what data collection method you select, make sure that you do the pre-test, or you implement the method on a small scale and check if there are some inconsistency, if some corrections need to be made in order the data collection method to function as it is supposed to do. Another thing we should have in mind is to maintain accurate records of what is collected. It means that you need to make sure that you do not make mistakes once recording what you saw, or once transferring the responses to an electronic form, or doing any other operations during the data collection. And the next thing you need to have in mind is to check the characteristics of the data. And what does it mean? We will see in the next slide which are the characteristics the data you collect should have. They are the following. The data should be relevant or needed to achieve the aim and the objectives. They should be credible, which means that you will capture reasonable data and the data that will produce the information we are seeking in our research. The data should also be valid, or the data collection method should actually be able or capable to collect the data that you needed, and they should be reliable, which means they should be precisely measured, and accurate, which means no mistakes will happen during any transformation of the form of the data. We have seen that we can collect qualitative or quantitative data, and we have seen when discussing research strategies that usually even the whole research is classified as qualitative or quantitative based on the data collected. That's why let's look at the data we will have if we adopt quantitative approach. We will usually have data in numerical form. The data will be such that they should be precisely measured. Such data can be age of people or animals, cost of products or programs or something else, length of anything that you can measure in length and height and area, speed, time, temperature. All these are precise data because they are expressed in numbers. Usually when adopting quantitative approach, it is harder to develop instruments for exact measurements. However, once we have that and once we collect the data, these data are easier to analyze in such a way that the analysis answers our research question. With qualitative approach, data usually deal with description. So they can have a form of open text, pictures, some artifacts, videos, and any other tape besides the numbers that we had with quantitative approach. The data are less structured than in case of quantitative data. However, the instruments for collecting data are easier to develop. On the contrary, here with qualitative approach, the labor is intensive when collecting and when analyzing the data. Here are the common methods that we will go through in this section, and they are here classified according to the approach you take. Usually the quantitative approach uses experiments and measurements and questionnaires, while the qualitative approach uses interviews, focus groups, observations, and documents. And we will look at each of these methods in this section. However, keep in mind that each scientific discipline may have their own data collection methods, so this list I have created is not exhaustive. Thank you for listening.